For thousands of women, domestic violence is a daily nightmare. It's carried out behind closed doors by the men they love. Many keep it secret, a hidden crime which goes largely unreported. But 1 million women a year do seek police help. All calls are logged, all emergency calls are taped. In August 1992, Diane dialed 999 when she was being assaulted by her husband.
The emergency operator heard Diane's desperate plea for police help. The phone was then dropped. Then all the operator could hear were Diane's screams.
Just 6 minutes later, Diane made another 999 call. It too was taped.
This time, Diane asked for an ambulance to come quickly. The operator asked what had happened. Diane said, "I've stabbed him 6 times.
Diane killed her husband, defending herself against domestic violence. Sandra, too, was driven to kill.
All that was going through my mind, just everything came back in one big flood.
So what happened?
I went and got the gun, come back in the bedroom, pointed it at him and fired.
But what happens when women who kill face the courts on a murder charge? Will they receive justice? This is their story. Sandra Fleming was a 15-year-old schoolgirl when she first met the man she was to spend the next 10 years with. Chris Porter was her 18-year-old neighbour.
For the first 6 months, he was great. Bought me anything I wanted, took me out, made me feel special, till I got pregnant. Which, I mean, the first time we had sex wasn't my choice. And when I found out I was pregnant, and I told him, that's when the hiding started. Well, in the hospital, he wouldn't let anyone in. He wouldn't let any of the doctors or the nurses in. Eventually, one of the nurses come into the room, said that a doctor had to examine me because the baby was there. When the doctor come in, tried to examine me, he headbutted the doctor, splattered his nose. The doctor went out, left the room, the nurse went out, left the room, left us there, just get on with it because of what he'd done. Eventually, he was trying to get me out the window of the hospital to get me home. Eventually, another nurse had come in and managed to persuade him to take me into the delivery room, which he did. He delivered my first child, but I had to have stitches. When I had to have stitches, it was a male doctor that had stitched me, which he wasn't pleased about. He threatened me all the way through the birth. He was going to punch me face in if I didn't push. If they had to use forceps, he was going to punch me there and then. And eventually, the midwife managed to persuade him to let the doctor stitch me because they had to cut me. When we got home, the next morning, he signed me out and took me home. He took me into the bathroom and kicked me between the legs because I'd let till the stitches had burst, because I'd let the doctor stitch me.
At 8 in the morning, prisoners on licence are allowed out of Holloway for the day. Emma Humphreys is one of them. She's already served 9 years for the murder of her violent partner, the length of many life sentences. But although Emma can now enjoy an occasional day out, she has no release date to look forward to. For Emma, violence in the home began when she was a child.
Me and my sisters, we used to huddle at the top of the stairs at night. There was 3 of us. And we'd be listening to it all happening downstairs and wondering, you know, when all the noise and everything stopped, what state my mum was going to be in when we walked down the stairs. If she was going to be dead, alive, where she was going to be in. It was horrible. And I don't know what made me run away. In the end, I just felt like there's got to be more. There's got to be something else.
Emma left her violent home and ended up working on the streets of Nottingham as a prostitute. She was 16 and homeless when one of her clients offered to take her in. Unbeknown to her, Trevor Armitage already had convictions for grievous bodily harm and assault.
Well, about 2 weeks after I moved in with him, the taxi man came back with the offer of the flat. He found a decent flat for me, and I was quite chuffed in a way. And I mentioned it to Trevor when we got home that night, and that was the first time he hit me.
Kiranjit Ahluwalia was 24 when her marriage was arranged to Deepak, a Sikh of the same caste. She was to endure 10 years of violence before killing her husband. Her case would challenge the court's thinking on domestic violence.
In the beginning, because this violence thing start from the first day of our marriage. First day he has argument with his sister, then he was breaking, that suitcase and, the present I brought him for him and his family from Canada. Then next time it was me. That was my first day in his family. And he was pushing me on the stair, pulling my hair, knocked that saucepan, curry saucepan on my feet. He was shouting, swearing at me. And it was, I was so frightened. I never seen, man's anger like that before. Never.
The full extent of domestic violence is unknown. Many women choose to conceal their experiences. A recent Home Office report states that as many as 1 in 4 women has been struck by her partner. In London, reports of domestic violence to police have increased by over 1,000% in the last 5 years, and it's rising.
At first, when he hit me, I thought, this guy cares about me, and, I'm better off here than moving out into a flat, because this guy cares about me, obviously, because, that's how I looked at it. I know it's wrong. And now I couldn't relate to him once he started telling me he loved me and he was hitting me and stuff. I couldn't sleep with him. Not the mix-up with the violence and I love you, and so I started to withdraw from him sexually. I didn't want to sleep with him.
I wanted to run, but he came and stand in front of me. He said, I know, you wanted to run to the police, don't you? And there was a couple of bottle of milk, that family got. And he picked one of that milk bottle. He said, look at this bottle. I'm going to break this bottle and pull it in your tummy and in your stomach. Now try to run to the police. Come on, run, bastard. And I was standing in the door. I don't know run. I don't know go back in the house. If I go back, he's going to beat me badly. If I run to the police, he's going to beat me badly. Maybe he's going to kill me with that bottle. I was so confused. And there was a number of occasions he done to me.
The first baby was 6 weeks old. I tried to get away, which I did get away, but he managed to find me, took me back, and I got pregnant again. The second child, I tried to get away again. He found me, brought me back. Then he realised I was pregnant with the second child. He wouldn't let me out at all in case I tried to go to the doctor or a hospital or go and get help. So he kept me in the house most of the time, or if I went out, he had to be with me. Up until me giving birth. I was in labour for 4 days. When it come to me giving birth, he wouldn't let a midwife come or phone an ambulance for me, or he kept me in the room. When I gave birth to the second child, he broke the waters. When I gave birth to her, because I was having trouble, he cut me with a razor blade to help the baby out. And then because I screamed, stopped punching me in the face to try and keep me quiet. someone had found an ambulance. The ambulance come, took the baby, but he wouldn't let me go. Police and everybody came then, but I mean, nothing was done about it, nothing went any further. After the second child was a couple of months old, I tried to get away again. I got away, he found me again, brought me back. Every time he brought me back, I was given hidings for going, hidings for what had happened previous with the first child in hospital. Then he decided that all he wanted was his first child. He didn't want me, he didn't want the other child. So I'd agreed that he kept the first child, and I went, hoping that it'd resolve the violence, keep the peace with everything. Then I found out 2 years later that he was treating the son grossly, from what I was told. So I arranged to meet him, to go back to meet him, to see if I could sort something out. And it was like I'd never been away. As soon as I got there, he grabbed me by the throat, took me back to the house, threatened me with a knife, raped me again, and told me I'd never get away. If I did, he was going to chop me up and spread me over England, make sure that no one ever knew where I was, which over a period of time it did. Because he wouldn't let me out, because he wouldn't let me speak to anyone. I couldn't see my family, I couldn't see friends. The only one who'd see me was him or people around him. If he had chopped me up and spread me over England, nobody would have known. Because like he said, all he'd say is, oh, she's run off again. And it frightened me, because I thought, yeah, he could do it and get away with it. So I was stuck. I couldn't get away again, I knew that.
25% of all murders happen in the home, and most of the victims are women. And nearly half of all the women who are killed die at the hands of the men they love.
What I'd done once before was I'd cut my wrists to let him know I can't take no more. At one time when we was going through a really bad patch, and it really made him stop and think, and it just come in my mind to do that. So I went downstairs into the knife drawer, took out a knife, and the drawer was still open, and I thought, no, this is going to be really dramatic for when he walks in. I'm really going to let him know that I've had enough. So I took out another knife, and I went upstairs, and it's like I didn't want to do it, but I had to get his attention. So I cut my wrists, and I sat there waiting for him to come home, and I heard the door go, and I heard him slam the door shut, and I just panicked then. I was on the landing, basically cornered. There was no time to move, no time to do anything. I heard him coming up the stairs. I pulled down my jumper sleeves, just put the knives under my legs, didn't have time to move anywhere, and just sat there. And he came up the stairs, he never spoke to me. He came behind me, went into the bedroom, and I could hear him taking off his clothes. And it's like I was praying, please just go to bed, go to bed. And it was like I was waiting to hear if he was gonna get in the bed. But he didn't. He came out of the bedroom, and I'm sat here. He lied down. He had an open shirt on, but he had nothing else on. And he just lay there silent beside me, and it was just waiting for it to start. And once I knew he was stripped, it wasn't just gonna be a thump around the head and you slut, you whore, you whatever. You know, he wanted to have sex with me against my will.
In the end, I couldn't take him anymore. And he put, he put hot iron on my face. And I couldn't sleep. And I went in his room. He was sleeping. And I called him, Deepak. Twice I called him because I wanted to talk with him. I wanted to tell him I can't sleep, I can't eat. Here you are sleeping, you are talking, you are enjoying your life. Can't you see me the way, I'm living now? And he just turned his face. Completely ignored me the way, he ignored me before. I went downstairs, I thought that's it. I drink again. I don't know, actually, in my mind, I don't know what I was doing. The only thing I knew that, I wanted to give him pain now. So he can realize the way, I'm getting mentally and physically pain from him. There was end for everything, and I couldn't see any end from him, from his violence, from his pain. I was getting day by day. I got downstairs and took that petrol and threw on his feet. I took that lit candle. I don't know where the hell I got this idea from. No idea. But I don't know where that strength came from. But that day, I was taking that petrol and it lit a stick in my hand. It could burn me alive that time. I wasn't thinking in that,
10 days later, Deepak Ahluwalia died in hospital from his burns.
And I was sat there knowing that as soon as he moved me in, as soon as things started, there was going to be 2 knives and we were both going to be up on that landing, and I don't know if he was going to turn around and say, well, if you want help to die, here you go, stick a knife in me. I just thought, I've got to stop him. But to get that knife from under my leg and stab him was it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And I just grabbed it and shut my eyes and turned around, and I didn't even look. Because his bottom part was down here, I knew where he was, and I just didn't.
He had a gun that he kept under the floorboards because he was a drug dealer and a loan shark. And he was having trouble with another drug dealer, which is what the gun was bought for. The night it all happened, he'd come upstairs and wanted sex with me, and then he started bringing everything back up, everything that happened over the years. The running away, the doctors, the hospitals, everything got brought up that he used to bring up. And then because he said, if you ever go again, I'll show you what I'll do. He'd gone and got the gun, and got plastic gloves, covered the gun with plastic gloves, put plastic gloves on himself, told me to spread my legs and put the gun inside me, and told me not to move because it was loaded. Well, I was shaking from head to toe, trying not to move. Then he took it out, dragged me into the kids' bedroom, pointed at the 2 girls' heads and said, if you ever leave them, this is what I'll do. Because I'd left my son before with him previous. And he dragged me back into the bedroom, and I tried to get dressed. I was trying to get my clothes on, he was kicking me in the face. Pushed me on the bed, told me to stay there. He'd gone and put the gun back onto the floorboards, got in bed, told me to go to sleep. I was just lying there with everything going through my head. Everything that had happened over the years, everything he'd done, everything he'd said he was going to do. I was thinking of my kids, picturing their faces crying and screaming, help me mum, and I couldn't do nothing. There was nothing I could do. And I went and got the gun from under the floorboards, come back, pointed it at, just fired. I run out the bedroom, run downstairs, threw the gun on the floor, got the kids, got them out the house. Brad picked the gun up and put it on down my pants, thinking, well, you can't kill me with it if I've got it. Because he'd always said he'd kill me if I ever touched it, if I ever put my fingers on it. I'd gone to a friend's, took the kids there, and run straight to the police station, told them what had happened and give them the gun. But I didn't know he was actually dead till they charged me with murder.
Diane is another woman who killed her husband. Her desperate attempts at self-defense were recorded seconds before she stabbed him. We've used an actress's voice to tell her story.
I lived with my husband for 5 years before we decided to get married. About a year after the relationship, he started getting, be a bit possessive and asking me questions all the time, where I'd been. And I then learnt that he'd been married twice before, and both his wives had, encountered physical and mental violence, which, I asked him about, and he just says, they're just stories, you shouldn't listen to them. He did, start again really violent then. He broke my collarbone. I used to go to work with black eyes, busted lips, my nose, my nose really swollen. And he broke my wrist. He used to kick me. He used to throw me downstairs. He chucked a TV set at me once. I got glass all in my head and down my face, and people say to you, well, why don't, leave him? But it was my village with my friends and my family. And my grandma used to say to me, you've got to try and work at relationships, and that's what I did, really. When I phoned the police, they came out quite a few times. I got my eyes cut and my lips, were bleeding, and they just used to say, we don't like to get involved in domestic violence. We can take your husband to the cells overnight, but, just be kept overnight. And, he never went. They never took him. More or less, they were saying, we don't want to know unless anything happens. And that's, what did happen. I got in at 12:25, just opened the door, and I could see by his eyes. You could tell, when he was going to be nasty. He just grabbed me by my throat, lifted me up. He was shaking me and squeezing my neck. And he just says to me, your lover boy's outside. It was a taxi man what had gone. And I just kept saying to him, I haven't got a lover boy, I just wish you'd stop it because you spoil everything. And I fell on the floor and he punched me right in my temple. I stood up and I went to the phone. I tried to phone and I couldn't, get the number. I was crying. I said, I want the police. He snatched the phone off me and it went on the floor, and all the time, which I didn't know, it was being tape recorded, the sound of me screaming and everything.
On the recording was the sound of Diane screaming, "Get off, get off." She was obviously in great distress. Her husband was shouting, accusing Diane of having a lover boy. The sound of furniture being broken could also be picked up. The emergency operator told police that Diane now appeared to be away from the phone. A police officer agreed he too could hear Diane and her husband fighting in the background. Because Diane didn't come back on the line, the police told the operator they would send somebody to her address anyway. The emergency operator continued to monitor the call. The fight carried on. The operator could hear Diane's husband say, "Don't think about the police." Her screams could also still be heard. Eventually, Diane managed to get back to the phone and again asked for help. The operator confirmed that the police were on the way.
There was a knife on the floor of the tabletop, which, had broken because he smashed my head on it. And I just tried to stop him hitting me with the chair. I didn't know how many times I stabbed him, but I just tried to defend myself.
Diane was hysterical when she got through to the emergency services. She asked them to send an ambulance, quickly. The operator checked her address and telephone number. Diane was sobbing. She said, "Come quickly, come quickly." He asked her what had happened. Diane said, "I've stabbed him 6 times.
Diane was charged with murdering her husband. Her lawyers considered advising her to plead self-defense at her trial, which, if successful, would have meant a complete acquittal. But would a jury believe that stabbing a man 6 times could be an act of self-defense? Diane decided she could not run the risk of that defense failing and being sentenced to life imprisonment. In the end, she decided to plead diminished responsibility, which would reduce the murder charge to manslaughter, and hoped that the 999 tapes would convince the jury she'd suffered enough.
What often happens is that other defences which might ordinarily be afforded to people are avoided for women or fail women because they weren't designed with women in mind. When being attacked, women feel often that they have to reach for a weapon. And so if in self-defence they use a knife, having just been struck with a hand or a fist, and they then stab someone several times, it may seem like excessive force, it may seem unreasonable. And so they may find that the defence of self-defence is failed for them because, of course, it's not about even-handed combat in the way that the defence was created with men in mind.
I went the next day to court. You know, I was even more frightened because I just didn't know what to expect. Because, you know, I'd made all my plans. I'd packed my suitcase, thinking at worst, because, you know, I kept thinking, well, women always get locked up. I was sick when I was listening to the tape. You know, it made me sick. I came out. The judge, he said a few words and he went away to make his mind up. I went downstairs and sat and waited, you know, planning everything in case I was sentenced. And came up and he gave me, you know, a suspended sentence. But it's still like having a sentence, really, because I've lost everything. Fair enough, he's let me off for what I've done, but it was self-defence. I mean, you've got no other way of stopping somebody that's strong and heavy, and I just had enough.
Diane was convicted of manslaughter and given a 15-month sentence, suspended for 2 years. But she still feels that many people did not understand why she was driven to kill her husband. In Sandra Fleming's case, experts would explain to the court why she had killed.
When it actually came to trial the day of, I'd got that way that I didn't care. I didn't care. The rest of my life in prison couldn't have been as bad as the rest of my life with the kid's father. Couldn't have possibly been. I'd have had more chance surviving in prison than I would surviving with him. Plus, at least I was free. As far as I was concerned, I might have been locked behind bars, but I was free. And myself, I was free. I didn't mean to kill him. I didn't want him to die. For my own moral beliefs now, I'm left with that. I'm left, I've got to spend the rest of my life thinking every day about what I've done.
The court allowed Sandra to plead guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility, and the judge placed her on probation for 3 years after hearing that she was suffering from battered woman syndrome the night she killed. But he described her case as wholly exceptional and warned that no woman should get the idea that if she has been ill-treated by her partner, she has the right to shoot him.
Women very often find that they end up using the defence of diminished responsibility at the time when a killing takes place, often because they are suffering from some degree of mental impairment, which satisfies the court. Very often, for example, battered women are suffering from serious depression because, not surprisingly, long-term abuse can take a terrible psychological toll on people.
It's important that people know what goes on, because unless people actually see you beat up, you're pouring with blood, your cuts where you've been stabbed, your burns where you've been burnt, nobody really can accept or take in what happens. Which is why I'm talking about what has happened to me. So people do listen, people do take notice, and something does get done to help other women and children.
Sandra Fleming's case was one of the first in this country where the controversial battered woman syndrome was used to help the court understand the psychological effects of long-term battering.
There is concern. I know the concerns, particularly by feminists, that this is simply medicalising a problem which should be in the social responsibility. My view is completely different, and I think before we had battered woman syndrome, what would happen is that women were presenting in terrible distress, depressed, anxious, crying, sometimes with bruising. They were unable to talk about this, and if they did talk about battering, people didn't believe them. And so their distress was simply attributed to some kind of inherent weakness, women becoming depressed for no reason at all. The problem was located within the woman. Now that there is a recognition that about the experiences these women have to put up with, there is a greater understanding that these women's distress is appropriate. It is an entirely normal response to a very abnormal and distressing traumatic event within the family situation. It means that we can no longer ignore the fact there is a causation to these women's distress, and we need to stop treating the women. We need to actually start looking at the cause of their distress much more seriously.
Diane and Sandra walked free. Many women who kill don't. It's estimated that half of the 90 women currently serving life in Britain's prisons were sentenced for killing violent partners. 3 years earlier, when Kiranjit was tried for the murder of her husband, little evidence was heard by the court about the effects of her long-term abuse. Her lawyers advised her to plead provocation, the third defence to murder, which depended on them proving she had suffered a sudden and temporary loss of control when she set light to her husband's bedclothes. However, the court found that the length of time between Deepak's last attack on her and Kiranjit's retaliation constituted a cooling down period, not one when her emotions boiled over.
I always have, faith in British law. I thought, there are 2 court injunctions, which is the biggest proof, and family evidence, doctor's report, and my work manager's report was quite helpful. And family's witness. But nobody tried to understand, they just ignore all the proofs, which they got in front of them. Nobody tried to understand why, in the end, this woman put herself in this situation.
Women will much more often be on this slow fuse. And I often try to describe it to a jury as being like the fuse on dynamite, where they ultimately snap and go out of control. But it may take a period of time before that actually happens. And of course, the definition in law has been that there should be sudden and temporary loss of control. And the case law has tended to suggest that had to be immediate in the face of the provocation. And so many lawyers would advise women that because there was delay, that the defence was not available to them.
The defence of provocation failed Kiranjit, and she was sentenced to life. But after her conviction, her case was taken up by the campaign group Southall Black Sisters.
We recognised that Kiranjit was a woman who had been subjected to repeated violence throughout her 10-year history. When she was convicted for the murder of her husband, Deepak Ahluwalia, we launched a campaign and directed her to lawyers whom we thought were better able to represent her case.
And when she explained me campaign, all the publicity, leaflet they will print, they're going to print my leaflet or my photograph, things like that, find me solicitor, I felt a bit embarrassed, ashamed, you know. I thought, no way, you know, I don't want more people know my case. When I saw my leaflet, for a couple of hours, you know, I was walking, you know, I didn't like it. But after that, I thought, sir, this is all, you know, family, honor, religion, what they done to me, I don't care. I just tell them, okay, then go on, do my campaign. And
we wanted the courts to understand that history of violence that she had suffered, and that inevitably involved a major campaign on our part, because the courts have been, until recently, impervious to that kind of understanding.
Kiranjit's case was referred to the Court of Appeal. The Lord Chief Justice ordered a retrial. He accepted that judges could be less strict in defining sudden and temporary loss of control in the defence of provocation.
I don't know what was happening in court. It was, you know, it was with fear and with, you know, nervous, you know, my ears started blocking, you know, I couldn't hear. The only thing I heard, you know, when all the people, they clap, and then I realized, you know, there must be good news. I couldn't believe. I just, you know, covered my face and, you know, put my head down. And the officer took me. I couldn't even, I wanted to ask the judge, can I feed my children? Can I play with my children, you know? I mean, I'm free now. I couldn't believe it. I wasn't expecting so many people, you know, family members. And SBS and Rohit, everyone so pleased. I couldn't cry. It took me a couple of days to cry. And
I mean, the sad thing is that I'm now receiving letters from women who are serving life imprisonment sentences, having been convicted of murder, who are in exactly the situation where they killed husbands who battered them, and who, if the understanding and knowledge that we now have had been available to them, the outcome may have been very different for them. And some of them are well into those sentences, having spent many years in prison. And so, I mean, there are still people who have been failed in the past, and any change in the law, of course, is not likely at the moment to help them. So the issue really for them is that, I mean, I do think that maybe we should be having a review of the women who are currently serving life sentences to see whether amongst them there aren't women who shouldn't be there.
Kiranjit's case is regarded as a landmark in the application of the law to battered women who kill. But will this now help other women? 9 years ago, Emma felt the jury would never understand what she had suffered.
I didn't feel like anybody would understand. I thought I just couldn't, I hadn't talked to anybody really about anything, except maybe briefly to inmates like that were around me in Risley on the hospital wing. And I thought with being a prostitute and an alcoholic and my history that would, you know, people would just look at me as that anyways, and they aren't the kind of nice people in society anyways, and I just didn't feel able to relate. Nobody had come across that I could talk to. I don't know if I was ready to. Well, no, obviously I wasn't. And when the jury came back with a guilty verdict, I was expecting it.
Little over a year ago that we were here, and many of you would have been here as well. holding a benefit to help fund the campaign to fight for the release of Kiranjit Ahluwalia. I'm very pleased to say that that campaign was successful, and we have Kiranjit here today, and she's going to be saying a few words. I'd like to say a little bit about Emma Humphreys. Emma was 16 years old when she met Trevor Armitage. He'd subjected her to 6 months of severe emotional, physical and sexual violence. And it was through defending herself against a rape that she stabbed him. She was 17 and she was sentenced to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure. She is still at Her Majesty's pleasure. And I think Emma Humphreys represents all the forgotten women, all the women that are still in prison that we don't know about, and there are many of them.
Emma's case has been taken up by campaigners who are working to get it referred to the Court of Appeal. They want the courts to understand the abuse she suffered before stabbing her partner.
She served 9 years now, which is actually the length of many people's life sentences. So she actually could be paroled, but Emma is determined to fight a conviction. She doesn't want to be recognised as a murderer. She wants her conviction quashed and to be given the sympathy and understanding that she deserves as a woman who killed a man to save her own life.
Deodorant, if you can.
Deodorant, perfume.
Occasionally allowed out of Holloway on licence, Emma is slowly learning to live in the outside world once again, but still has no release date to look forward to.
You're taking just the roll-on ones, is it?
I'm such a spoiled son. It's wonderful to be out, but this is like, for you never been in prison, for you to go to prison would be another world. This to me is another world. I feel alienated in the outside. I feel like green and everybody else is yellow, and even though I carry on like life's wonderful, I'll probably walk back into prison tonight with a big smile on my face and go in my room and probably be very upset.
Sarah Thornton is also serving life after stabbing her violent alcoholic husband. Despite losing one appeal and being refused second leave to appeal, her lawyers still believe the courts have not yet heard the full facts of her case. Sarah continues to campaign for justice in tapes recorded in her prison cell.
At the end, you know, towards the end, they knew that he was beating me up. The police had been called out several times, not just by me, but by other people. I began to feel as if there was absolutely no hope, because nobody cared. I began to increasingly feel as if there was some sort of conspiracy between Malcolm and the police. I felt they wouldn't help me because they didn't want to.
What happened to Sarah at her trial was that she was compartmentalised by her lawyers and defined as suffering from diminished responsibility without any regard to the behaviour of her husband. In attempting to react to that wrong classification, on appeal, diminished responsibility was jettisoned as a concept, and instead the total concentration was on provocation and whether she was allowed to rely on being provoked when provocation hadn't happened within the 30 seconds before she took that fatal action towards her husband.
I found the whole episode at the Court of Appeal quite humiliating. I was told that they'd watched me during the appeal, and when Lord Gifford first started to speak on my behalf, I wept, and I didn't have a tissue, and I had to wipe my nose on my skirt, and I thought, oh, they're going to think I'm a slut. When I asked Lord Gifford to find out if someone could get me a cushion so I could see what was happening, the judge instructed the clerk of the court to arrange something. Nothing was done. And I was told by one of the officers that If I made a fuss about it, I would be taken downstairs and my appeal would be heard without me.
It's not just the fact that she killed, which in itself is a great taboo for women. It's the fact that she refuses to be a victim. She refuses to feel guilt above and beyond the guilt that you would normally feel for killing a loved one. She recognises that she was forced to take the action that she did and that she's not going to apologise for it, and she's demanding justice.
I can't see any way that Sarah would be convicted of murder today. We're all wiser. The lawyers who defended her at trial and appeal would not enter a trial in the ignorance they did. All of us have understood infinitely more as a result of Sarah's case, including psychiatrists and certainly including judges.
It really was all right for him to beat, as long as we kept it quiet. Something like domestic violence. It's very hard to actually put across in a court of law because it has nothing to do with laws. Domestic violence is about pain and power and control. Is it any wonder that it's the one big issue that is not yet resolved? Is it any wonder that people don't want to see it?
For many women, the only sanctuary is a woman's refuge. But there aren't enough refuges. For every 3 women who need help, there is only one place available. Sandra Hawley runs Refuge in Chiswick, set up 22 years ago to provide a lifeline for battered women. She also provides counselling and expert testimony in court.
We haven't got enough staff, we don't have enough funding, we cannot meet the demand. We have thousands and thousands of women ringing on our crisis line, and we can only accommodate 300 or 400 women every year. So there's a huge shortfall of places for battered women. In 1975, the Select Committee on Violence in Marriage recommended that there be 1 refuge bed space per 10,000 population. We only have 1/8 of that refuge provision in this country at the moment. In 1993, the Select Committee recommended the provision of a central coordinated policy of refuge provision throughout the country. This would be the most cost-saving measure and was a first priority for the government. Since the Select Committee made its recommendation, there has been no funding made available for refuges.
Make them all sit up nicely. Can you do that?
Battered women have to have a means of escape. Refuge provision is crucial. Women who kill their partners are often driven by despair, hopelessness, a sense of helplessness. Their actions are governed by fear. They are subjected to violence every day of their lives, and they often feel that the only way out of the situation is to kill their partners. Many abused women have been for help. They've tried going to the police. They've gone to the relevant agencies. They've moved to refuges. Their husbands have tracked them down. Time and time again, women reach out for help and the system lets them down.
If it wasn't for the refuges, I wouldn't have got what bit of support I did from the times of getting away. That little bit of sanity, even though it wasn't for long, it was a bit of sanity out of that situation. The refuges, yeah, they are the main support now for women and children who are being battered. There's got to be someone out there that can help you. Hopefully now things will change with support for other women and children. Because it isn't just women, the children go through it. And then they grow up with that and it ends up a never-ending circle.
I'm strong. I feel strong because I know there are so many people who still loves me and supporting me. That's why the campaign is very important. We must struggle and keep our fight on. Sarah and Emma Humphrey, I met them in prison, and they are very strong. So we must continue our fight. We are not free until they are free. Thank you very much.
I do not believe I'm guilty of murder. I do not believe I deserved a life sentence. And I've never been tried fairly, and that is something I want and something I will work for, no matter how long it takes me.
From having no choices at all, and now having any choice I want. Trying to get there. Yeah, I'm building my life. Yeah, I'm a lot happier. I'm free now.